If you're longing to break free from inherited pain and step into your heart-centered power, this video guide is for you. I'm Elaine, author of Blueprint to the Heart, and in these videos, I will go beyond just reading the book. We'll illuminate hidden patterns, explore new healing perspectives, and dive deep into the transformative tools that help me break my own chains. Think of this as a companion to Blueprint to the Heart, where I share the how behind my healing journey. If you want to grab your copy of the book, grab your journal, and let's begin looking at the healing journey with a different perspective. Welcome back into my book, Blueprint to the Heart, and I'm excited to get into the second chapter. This book is very layered, and each chapter is broken down into several different sections because it is very layered, very potent, and it takes a lot of time to process and digest this information. So take your time going through this, and also know that you can't like rush through these things, especially when we are digging up generations of passed down belief systems, mind constructs, and trauma. And that is what we are talking about today. So, chapter 2 is generational trauma. And I want to make very clear that this is me sharing what I have studied and the resources I found helpful for me. I'm sharing what made sense, what clicked, and how I was able to use the information that I'm sharing with you in order to really dig into my past and learn the core of why there were so many self-destructive behaviors, and how to learn how to begin like truly loving myself and learning to live a life full of love, compassion, and empathy instead of anger, resentment, and rigidity. As we begin in the second chapter, this is where it can get to be a little scientific, and you can look into your own research or your own studies as well. The first book that made so much sense to me was Your Body Keeps Score. And this book, when you read things or when you hear things and you're like, that just makes so much sense. When The Body Keeps Score was the first one where it talks about it doesn't matter if you remember what happened in your trauma. In fact, you're probably not going to remember if they're very traumatic. Your body and our brain is designed to forget those very traumatic experiences. However, because it is a complete disconnect from our mind and our body holds on to that, what I have been seeing a lot of, especially when I was working in a treatment facility, was that there would be women that would not remember their childhood or had very fragmented memory of their childhood. Yet, when their memory would pick up, they would have it was almost straight into addiction. To me, these were all like signs that, like, okay, so maybe our brains cannot hold this information because it's like it shut down. It was too powerful of an emotional influence that it required our brain to shut down. However, our body keeps that. And that is why we do see so much sickness going around, especially like stress induced things. Everything comes down to the core of how well we are able to actually regulate our stressors in life. So, this book, What The Body Keeps Score, led me to the next book, which is It Didn't Start With You. Now, this book was and still is a foundational piece in me learning to pick up the pieces and put the puzzle pieces, the fragmented pieces of not only my past, but my mom's past and my grandparents' past. And it's said that it takes 3 generations to actually, to look backwards and to see what you haven't inherited from past generations. And it takes 3 generations of our ascendants to actually be able to break that chain and change our epigenetics. Now, again, this is going to get a little scientific here. So, that we are made of DNA, right? Within our blood, within our genes, it is our DNA. This is forever. This is a constant. So, however, when there is a disrupt to our system, our DNA starts to mutate and expresses itself in a different way. This is what we call epigenetics. So, epigenetics is really this is how we can learn to change the way that our DNA is expressed, not change our DNA, but to change the way that we actually can regulate our systems enough that we're able to actually change the way that our whole expression of our being, our cells, our cellular memory, all of those things can be changed with the internal work of generational healing. If you want to look into the body keeps score, if you want to look into it doesn't start with you, or it didn't start with you. And also, if you are at all interested in the gene keys, this was also a very foundational piece for me to learn about what happens during our development, during in utero, and also like how our genes are expressed within our environments per se. So like our environments change the way that we express our genes, because our environments change the way that our cellular structure is, which changes the way that our genes, our genetics are expressed. So I know that's a lot of information. I've given you some great resources there. So now with this book by Mark Wolin, it goes into, and this is something that I connected to. He goes into this practice that he had, and when he talks about a lot of his clients that he was seeing were having these very irrational fears, such as dying in the cold or such as being burnt. And it's very just interesting to think about how he was able to actually go back and trace through the family tree, like how actually that there were people in the family that had died this way, that one of his clients, great grandmother, was burnt in the Holocaust and was survived her. So look into all of these things, study them for yourself. I'm here to just share how I've connected my experiences with the information I'm giving you. So me coming into recovery for the umpteenth time after nearly drinking myself to death, I needed to start looking at things differently. As I came into recovery for the umpteenth time around, this last time I really needed to start to look at things differently. What I had began looking at was my mom and looking at how she was raised and what type of living circumstances she had. And then looking at my grandma and looking at the circumstances that she had. And I had this thought that there was something in me like, why was this generation able to handle these type of circumstances better than this generation? And why does it seem that the trauma or the addictions that I see happening are happening at a younger age? Like, why do I see so many other things that are starting to have like less and less tolerance for this? I intuitively knew that like somehow our systems, it made sense to me that we pass down the genetics of how we are made up physically. Why wouldn't we pass down the genetics of how we're able to handle things in real life, emotionally, physiologically? how would we not pass down the things through our system like sicknesses, right? We are so open to being like, oh, this is passed down through our genes. So is trauma. Trauma is again, it is happens within our a brain disconnect, which creates the our immune system and our central nervous system to build up with basically with the hormone. We make an extra or more amount of the stressor cortisol hormone. And this, right? So it passing down trauma, unhealed trauma. Okay, so when we're thinking about diseases, we think about, right, like we pass down heart diseases, we pass down all these other different types of what we see as like physical diseases. So it made sense to me that trauma is stored in your nervous system. The more that you learn about trauma and learn the physiological effects of it and how it actually, in order for it to be processed, it actually has to be acknowledged in your body and like actually somatically healed and emotionally integrated. So there has to be a connect of the brain and the body. And so here's the thing, when I'm thinking back to my grandma or my great grandparents, the war that was happening that my great grandparents were in, it was too difficult. People didn't have the resources. They didn't know. It wasn't a priority to be emotionally adept. It was a priority to live. And this is what we have to keep coming back to. So it wasn't it unknowingly passing down these genetics down to our offspring. So one generation has war in it, has the war within the nervous system, and it passes down to the next offspring, the next generation. Now, this generation just has even more trauma that gets packed onto the already compromised system, and then it just gets passed down to even more compromised system of the offspring. And because not only is it genetically passed down and passed down through our behaviors, so it is passed down because, again, if we are unaware of how we are affecting somebody emotionally, physically, and systemically, essentially, we will continue these same cycles. So it is because we perpetuate the same cycles of emotional immaturity, neglect, and also things that we would say today as abuse. Discipline was such a strong thing for parents to give children, that getting beat with a belt or a wooden spoon is not unheard of. Like that was a popular discipline method. And so these are things that we don't take into consideration because it was so desensitized and normalized back in the day. And now we have these people who talk about, back in my day, I walked however long, or I walked 10 miles in a snowstorm and I came out fine. And look at, why is this person complaining? They're just too sensitive. Oh, they're so soft. And that's exactly right. That type of thinking perpetuates. Like if you're thinking that way, we're comparing living situations and thinking like, oh, I made it out okay, to be nurturing at that time. Like it was nearly impossible because things were so difficult for living circumstances that the nurturing was almost like a death wish in a way. It's just you didn't have the time, you didn't have the energy, you didn't have the capacity essentially to have the emotional aspect. And so this is like how the evolution takes place, is because it really was just about surviving. And now we're in this place where it's like, okay, we are in a complete consumerism world now, or at least in America, where there is so many resources, but now it's people are afraid to even give up resources. And so now we're balancing out the scales. We're balancing out the scales individually and collectively. There's so much coming to light as to, wait, why is this, like in our government, within the smaller communities, within different organizations, and at a very individual level. As you notice, like people again are becoming more sick. The rates of disease and illness is going up, and stress. How many people do you know that want to attempt meditation or want to attempt to do mindful living or know that they need to slow down, but really don't know how to slow down? Like that's nearly everybody in the US. If there is We're looking at things as if we're at a tipping point here where we have all of the survival mechanisms here. We have all of the things in place that are actually now blocking our emotional intelligence, that are blocking our emotional security. And so when we start looking at generational trauma, what we can think of is if you were born into a family that has child molesters, I'm just going to say it, right? Like that started with someone. Okay. If you were born into a family with addiction and alcoholism, that absolutely started somewhere, meaning that is passed down through the generations. It's said that the families that have alcoholics or people who abuse substances, if they are born while their parents are addicted to substances, it's like a 1 in 3 chance that they will be addicted as well. So really, because I come from a long line of people being addicted to alcohol, this is what made me start to look at things very differently. Also, if you come from a family that had abuse, like physical domestic violence, they learned that from somewhere. It's not like those types of, it's perpetuated through our behaviors, which is also then ingrained into our systems. If we do not, if we're just passing through life and not actually going back and like recognizing, healing, addressing, and looking at the certain situations that continue to pop up for us, then it's time to maybe look at generations past. For me, it was so many times of going back into treatment and going back and like trying to get clean that made me be like, okay, so how is it that my whole family has issues with alcohol? And what does that look like actually? That for like, where did that, not only is that behaviorally accepted, but it is also physiologically passed down. What you can do, and this is why this book is about generation. It's all about uncovering things that we don't know. And I feel this is can be very difficult for people because most people just want to look at their life, and most people want to be able to just take a look at what they are experiencing in the present now and just relate it to like a situation that happened in the past that they are over or that they moved through it. Let me share this with such compassion and kindness. There is always more. There is always more to uncover. If you are unhappy and unfulfilled in any area of your life, if things don't feel aligned with how you feel they quote unquote are meant to be, there's somewhere in your past that you haven't looked at yet. There's a belief system in place that has been in place since before you were born. Whether that is a belief system that was put upon us because our parents didn't want us to live like they did, or if it was put upon us because our parents didn't want to be the type of parents that they had. There's That's passed down. So we get automatically pushed into structural belief system that isn't ours. We're taught values, we're taught morals, all because of what was important to the person that raised us or people that raised us. So in It Didn't Start With You, this has been an essential book again for me to look at in a compassionate manner rather than label them as incompetent or to label my ancestors as incompetent or emotional, unintelligent, and to look at them as ignorant, or it's not any of those things. It just wasn't, just very different. It was just a different way of living, a different standard of beliefs, and what mattered. I got when looking at this second chapter here in my book. Now, if there's a continuous pattern, there's something that is being missed. And if there's something in your life that you are unhappy with that continues to show up for you, there's something that is not being seen. And my book, Blueprint to the Heart, is to bring those things to the surface in order for us to heal and in order for us to break those cycles. Because it didn't start with you, but it can end with you. You can be the person that stops the perpetuation of the systemic trauma. So the difference between PTSD, CPTSD, so complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is CPTSD is layered. Some people are born into trauma. Like even having a traumatic birth is traumatic for the baby. Now, depending on the environment and the emotional awareness and nurturing of the mother specifically, yes, the father matters, but the mother is really where the first attachment happened. I mean, for obvious reasons, because the baby was growing in the mom's stomach. CPTSD can show up in so many ways. It's layers upon layers and upon layers. So when I think of PTSD, this would be somebody who has lived whatever a normal life is or would look like, somebody that is able to emotionally cope, someone that knows how to regulate their stress, someone that knows how to deal with tough circumstances. And they have one event or an event that is very shocking to the system. That is like a traumatic instance. So that's PTSD. So it is different when there are layers upon layers. And if you have one traumatic instance in your life, it heightens the chances for more trauma. It heightens because again, it is all about our nervous system. And so when we have such a shock to the nervous system, if we do not regulate it and connect it and integrate with our emotional and our physical body, we are highly triggered, and anything can then be triggering and activate that fight and flight response in order for our brain to shut down to messages to our body. So that's the difference between CPTSD and PTSD. So when people say that, I honestly, from my upbringing and the people that I have been around, I really only know CPTSD. And again, it's all relative. Some of the things that we see that can get passed down is like when we have an irrational fear of heights. So an irrational fear of water, or irrational, not invalidating, but like we have no idea where this fear came from. We have no idea where this anxiety came from. And no matter what I do, it's not relieving. I'm not able to relieve the anxiety. When we have these perpetual symptoms, physiological symptoms, when we start to become sick, and no matter what the doctors say or what they do, like we don't get better. One of the things with generational trauma is our gut is a lot of digestion issues. So looking into our past to connect all of the dots is crucial for this deep healing. Now, again, this is very layered. Other things to look for, even as children. As a child, like what did you experience anxiety? Did you experience like a disorder of sorts that, like people say, social anxiety or depression, or any of these things that started happening at a younger age for you? then you would definitely want to take a look into the past. You definitely want to start asking these amazing questions that are in my book, Blueprint to the Heart. Now, I'm just going to go through a couple of these questions because they are quite amazing. First, we want to look at if there are any patterns or behaviors within your relationships, in your family, that have seemed to repeat across generations. And if there's something like, oh, like me, oh, he had a drinking problem. Oh, he had a drinking problem. And my mom, and then me, anything like that, or any type of physical or emotional pattern you want to take a look at. You want to take a further look into your past and your parents' past. Now, if you have ever felt like you're so different from, and I don't know if this can be anybody, like I only relate and connect to feeling different, but I also feel that is part of generational trauma. So if you feel like you've never been a part of, or you feel like you've always been the odd person out within family connections or just within the world at large, there might be a chance that there's more to look into from this. Sure, it could just not be anything, but if you've been feeling like this and you're not feeling like it's not helpful to you, look further back at why you might feel alienated or why you might feel maybe a feeling of looked over or disconnected from the family. Or for me, it was like as if I didn't matter or I just wasn't a strong enough person in the family to be a part of. Of course, substance abuse and self harm and anxiety and depression are also things to really look for within healing generational trauma. This is a continuous cycle. So in chapter 2, this is the generational trauma, but chapter 1 is really where you will find a lot of your answers. So if you have resonated with any of this, oh yeah, I do have this persistent feeling of angst, or I have this anxiety that has just been with me forever, or I can't stop smoking cigarettes, or any type of addictive behavior. There is core reason that goes probably beyond just your lifespan. And when we are talking about this and going into these questions, it is so important to check in with yourself like often throughout the day and just to notice how you're feeling. Because when we do bring up this type of deep healing, it completely affects your body. Your body will start to show up for you in ways that it hasn't before. This is all stagnant energy within your system. This is all unprocessed emotional baggage, essentially, that has been passed down from you and that is now like being activated within your system in order for it to be recognized, released, and integrated. So check in with yourself regularly, take notice of your thoughts, and definitely keep like a diary and keep a diary and a journal. Some mantras for you to use when healing generational trauma would be I am safe. I am safe around the world. I allow myself to feel and express my emotions. I am worthy of love and compassion, and I forgive myself and others for past mistakes. I express my thoughts and feelings in healthy ways, and my voice is heard. So I hope that this was able to give some insight to you. I would love to hear any insights or what you have been embarking on with your healing and what this brought up for you. And so until next time, I am sending so much love.